Hi crafty peeps, it's Kat. In my last video I made a bunch of mixed media looking backgrounds and today we're putting those backgrounds to good use. My goal for these panels was to get at least 2 cards out of each, and I'm happy to report that I succeeded and exceeded as I have 9 cards for you today. In the interest of time for this video, I won't be showing how I made every single one of them, but you will definitely see all 9 at the very end. First, I wanted to show you some of the backgrounds. As you can see, there's plenty to choose from, and all of them were actually really easy and pretty fun to make. And I'm saying this as a person who kinda sucks at mixed media techniques. I'll have that first video linked for you in the description box if you want to see how I made these. So I picked my favorite 4 out of the pile, and these are the ones we'll be working with today. For my first 2 cards, we're going with this vintagey looking background. I used some pigment ink for the splatter, so it has some really nice metallic shine to it. Then I got a butterfly die here from Simon Says Stamp, but use what you have. I think a large flower die would also work nicely here. This butterfly one got some really nice details though, and I really like that. I got shimmer and glitter cardstock, and I brought in several shades because I wasn't sure which one would go better with what I had in mind. I also have a scripty background stamp and some leftover vellum. This is just an invitation jacket from long ago. If you ever receive like a wedding invitation wrapped in a vellum jacket, don't toss the jacket. You can totally upcycle it and use it for your cards. First, I'm gonna do some stamping, and I'm using the same ink colors that I used to create this background, so it all looks nice and cohesive. Here you see me just randomly inking the stamp, and here comes mistake number 1. If you're trying to do random stamping, like where some areas are stamped and others are not, and it looks super vintagey, make sure you use a blending brush to apply the ink, or at least blend those edges from the ink pad on the stamp. Because as you'll see when I flip the panel, I have pretty abrupt and sharp edges from my square ink pad. In the end, it doesn't matter all that much, but if you're a perfectionist like me, I definitely recommend using a blending brush to diffuse those edges for a smoother look. I'm gonna try to artificially age this panel, so I will first apply the lighter antique linen color around the edges and in random spots. And I'm not really concerned with keeping the border even or neat like I usually would. Then I'll switch to the darker vintage photo color and will darken the edges further. This time I'm trying to stay on the very edges, on the very border. Here's mistake number 2. I trimmed my panel down so that I can have a mat around it, and I managed to chop off all of my darker inking in the process. You know, there are some days where your crafty brain is just not working. So make sure you trim your panel to the size you want first before you do the inking, because I had to redo that last part of it. I have already cut the mat from the coppery shimmer cardstock you saw earlier, and I'm just adhering the panel to it. I think we end up with 1/8 of an inch of a border here, and I'll just wiggle it into place so it's even on all sides. Next, I'll assemble my butterfly. I have cut out a small mat from vellum with the Deckled edge die, and I'm gluing butterflies straight on top of that vellum. The reason I picked vellum is because I want to create some separation between my butterfly and the background so they don't just all blend together. But I also want it to be kind of subtle, and I don't want to introduce any more colors than I already have. I placed my butterfly kind of at an angle on that little vellum mat, and I only glued it in the center where the body is. And now it's just a matter of gluing on all of the details. I have kind of a love-hate relationship with detail dies. I hate putting them together, but I love the result. To me, they're definitely worth it, because the devil is always in the details. This card is pretty simple in terms of elements, but at the same time, I feel like it has a lot going on. I have glued my matted panel on a top folding A2 ivory card base, and I will pop my butterfly up with some foam squares. I'm only putting those in the center because I want to be able to later fold up those wings to create more dimension. And I also want vellum to be kind of floating above the background as it will provide more separation from it. I put some glue on the back of my foam squares, and that gives me more time to wiggle that butterfly in the exact position that I want. Thanks to the glue, I can pretty easily lift it off and restick it where I need it. I have a box of pre-cut sentiments sitting in my drawer, and I've been trying to use those up. And for this card, what I had in mind was a foiled rose gold sentiment, but the foil color didn't match my shimmer cardstock. And I don't know about y'all, but that kind of stuff really bothers me, so this rose gold one was a no-go. In the end, I settled on a black one. It's a bit bolder than what I was going for, but I still think it works. I stacked my sentiment 3 times, so there's 2 more blanks behind the text, and I'm using the T-square ruler to help me make sure that it's on straight. I'm going kind of on a diagonal from the butterfly by placing the sentiment in the lower left corner. Here's our first completed card. I love how the vellum looks like it's floating above the background. For my second set of cards, I'm going with a cover plate die. A couple of months ago, I made a Valentine's card with no Valentine's supplies because I didn't have any single themed Valentine's product in my arsenal. Check out that video if you're curious. Well, recently I decided to remedy the situation and I got some things with hearts on them and I'm putting them to good use. My panel is already 4¼ by 5½, so it fits kind of snugly into that cover plate. So I'll just tape it on the sides so that it doesn't shift when I run it through the machine. Then I'll pop out all of those hearts and I will save them because I can make at least one more card with those. I initially thought I was just gonna place some glitter cardstock behind the panel and call it a day, but then I thought all of the beautiful glitter is gonna be mostly covered up, so it just feels like a waste. So instead, I got another panel from glitter cardstock and I will use those glitter hearts to do an inlay in my rainbow panel, and I'll save the glitter background for another card. Here I wanted to quickly show you the difference between putting the glitter in the back versus inlaying the hearts. There's no right or wrong here, just a matter of personal preference. I think either one looks really beautiful. I will admit it was a bit annoying putting the glue in between all of those hearts. I should have probably used a double-sided adhesive here to make my life easier, but oh well. I will use the corner of my scoreboard to help me line up my card base and my panel. That makes it pretty easy to do. And then I'll go over the whole panel with the bone folder and really burnish it all down to make sure that it all sticks, especially so around the corners. And then I'll glue in those glitter hearts. This might look tedious, but honestly I find it kind of therapeutic. It's like putting together a puzzle. But to each their own, and I totally understand why some people don't like doing it. This whole process actually didn't take all that long, I'd say maybe about 10 minutes in total. For my sentiment, I went with the foiled one, and I think it's very fitting here, given all of the hearts that we have. I stacked it 4 layers thick, so there are 3 blank sentiments behind the text. The paper I foil on is a bit thinner than your usual cardstock, so stacking helps with sturdiness, plus it gives it a nice lift from the panel. Here you can see up close it's pretty thick. I love all that shine when the foil catches the light, and all we have left to do is just add it to the panel. And here's our completed card. It's so bright and happy and shiny. It honestly just makes me very, very happy. It's my favorite one out of the bunch. My next panel I'm gonna stretch into 3 cards. I have some stitched border dies here and I will cut about 1/3 of the panel. And I checked the stitching this time to make sure that it will be on the piece that I cut off. I just taped it into place and ran it through the die cutting machine. Here you can see that stitching detail up close. Then I took the same die, flipped it upside down, and moved it to the right so that I would cut the remaining piece in roughly half. I lined it up so that it would match the curve from the first cut, and here you go. I ended up with 3 pieces, 2 with the stitching and 1 without. I needed some backgrounds to pair up my pieces with, so I'm gonna do some stamping. At first I thought I was gonna use this background with presents, but you'll see later I changed my mind. This is just tone-on-tone stamping with clear embossing ink. And I'll also stamp out my sentiments while I have my MISTI out. The colors and the pattern of my panel pretty much scream 80s to me, so I decided to fully lean into the retro theme here. I found a sentiment in my stash. This is from Clearly Besotted, and it says, "You're not old, you're retro," and I think it's absolutely perfect for this. For my third card, I thought I would use a sentiment that I already had laying around, that purple "I appreciate you." I've cut a couple of extra backings to stack behind the sentiments, and for that skinny purple one, I'm just using another sentiment where the letters did not turn out crisp. But that won't work in the end. Turns out it's a different hue of purple than what I need, and in real life it's actually quite noticeable. I die cut another piece from holographic cardstock using the same border die, and this will go behind my main piece, and I'm gonna glue those together so that I have a thinnish strip of holographic cardstock peeking out. I had some glue oozing out here, and it's pretty easy to clean up with a damp paper towel or a baby wipe. So that my entire piece is all at one level, so that it sits nice and even on the card base, I also layered some scraps behind for the support. I glued my piece to a textured linen cardstock panel that I trimmed to 4 by 5¼ I wanted some additional texture on the card, but I didn't want anything too textury. I glued my piece on the very left, lining up the edges, and I cut off any excess that was hanging off. Here I'm measuring out how much I need to cut off from my additional sentiment backings so that it all sits nice and level on the face of the card. And I use my trusty T-square ruler to make sure that sentiment is on straight. And as a finishing touch, I added some shinies because, the magpie in me couldn't resist. On camera, these look purple, but they're actually iridescent blue. It's the ones that are in the second row, second compartment from the bottom. Here's the completed card. Nice and shiny. Let me know in the comments, are there any other magpies like me out there where you need to put shinies on everything? Here's that panel with the presents that we stamped earlier, and honestly, I wasn't feeling it. It looked way too busy for my liking. So first I trimmed it down to 4 by 5 1/4, and then I'm just gonna stamp my sentiments straight onto it. I decided to just leave it blank because I feel like between the super saturated purple and that colorful piece, it has enough things happening already. I rubbed the stamp with my finger to prime it since it's my first time using this one. This just removes the manufacturing residue and helps the stamp take the ink better. And I'm doing the tone-on-tone stamping again with clear embossing ink. I stamped it a couple of times to get nice coverage. I think it was 3 times in total. And now I'm just gonna adhere my colorful piece at the bottom, lining up the edges, and I'll cut off any excess that might be hanging off. And all that's left to do is just glue this onto the card base, and I'll line this up, leaving a nice even border all around. And for my last 2 cards, I was determined to squeeze every last drop out of that panel. I got a large frame, 2 sentiments, and also tiny little stars that you see sitting up there in the dish at the top. First thing I'm gonna do is stack my frame 3 layers thick to make it sturdier. The frame has a lot of cuts in it, and that kind of makes it a bit flimsy. I'm gonna stack 2 more white frames behind my colorful piece to make it stronger. While that was drying, I cut out my sentiments from some black and white craft foam, and I'm gonna use them to give my sentiments more dimension. Piece of advice here, peeps. Glue your cardstock to the foam first and then die cut. This way you won't have to fuss with the delicate foam pieces. These were not easy to line up at all, I'll be honest. But I think in the end it's worth it because look at how thick that puppy is. I embossed the white panel with an embossing folder and have already cut it down to fit behind the frame, and I glued those two together. I could have done a shaker here, that would have been really fun, but honestly I was kind of running out of steam at that point. Once the glue dried, I adhered the frame to the card base and put on my sentiment. Sorry, my head is kind of in the way. And I used those little stars I cut from the same panel as embellishments. Okay, y'all, let's take a look at all of the cards. The butterfly one was the first one that we made. I really like the floating vellum on it, that's my favorite part. And I really like all the shimmery details on the butterfly. For comparison, this is the second card I made from this panel, and here I glued the vellum straight to the panel without popping it up, and you can see the letters underneath, whereas on the butterfly card you really can't. So for this one, I got some stitched labels, overlapped them, and popped them up on some foam tape. And I did the same type of scripty, aged-looking background, except for the mat and that center label, I used glitter cardstock. I got a larger mat from Vellum using the Deckled edge die you saw in the beginning, and my sentiment is the same kind of strip that I have on the other card, but I trimmed down the sides so that it fits within that center label better. And here are both of them side by side. You can really see the difference with the vellum piece. This is our die cut inlay card. I just love all that sparkle. It just makes me so happy. And this is the second card I made with the leftover hearts from the rainbow panel. I actually have some left, so I can probably make another card out of those. I embossed the background using a burlap embossing folder and glued the hearts in a rainbow order on the left-hand side about a third of the way in. My sentiment was foiled using rainbow foil, and I feel like it just fits quite nicely here. I think this is a really good sentiment for almost any occasion. The next 3 we made from the 80s panel, as I dubbed it. I don't stamp stuff on the inside very often, but for this one, I did Happy Birthday. All the shine is really doing it for me. The next one is pretty simple compared to the first. I left the background plain and stamped the sentiment with clear embossing ink for tone-on-tone look. And I added some shinies off screen for some extra something something. The third one, I used an embossing folder, and then with the same stitched border die, I cut 2 pieces out of that embossed panel, and I made sure that they matched the curve of my colorful piece. Then I glued all 3 pieces to a blank panel and trimmed it down a bit and matted it with purple cardstock, but my card base is actually white, and I stamped the inside of this one with Happy Birthday too. Then the last 2 cards are pretty simple. Here's the white one with the frame. And to be honest, I wish I used the shadow outline for the sentiment because I feel like it gets a bit lost on white. Because when you look at the same one on black, you see the difference? Maybe I should have done both of them in black, but I kind of wanted to compare black and white side by side. Let me know in the comments which card is your favorite. I'll catch you guys in the next video.